Beloveds, we are singing and talking and praying for our lives. This is not an exercise or a school test. This is a test for all of us, not just in this country, but around the world. It is a test, and it is a time for us to shine. The reading I'd like to share with you this morning is by the great poet and great genius, one of the great geniuses of the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes, and this is entitled Dream Variations. To fling my arms wide in some place of the sun, to whirl and to dance till the white day is done, then rest at cool evening beneath a tall tree while night comes on gently, dark like me. That is my dream. To fling my arms wide in the face of the sun, dance, whirl, whirl till the quick day is done. Rest at pale evening, a tall, slim tree. Night coming tenderly, black like me. Langston Hughes was already well known around the world when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King came on the scene, or I should say, burst on the scene. They came to know one another well, respect one another, and inspire one another. You may have heard the repetition in that poem of what Langston Hughes says is his dream. The same kinds of themes interweave through both of their writings. They even made a trip to Nigeria together in 1960, both of them fiercely committed to the movement for civil rights in this country. But Dr. King was always very careful not to mention the name or refer specifically to Langston Hughes. He championed his ideas. He was a warm and good friend, as Langston Hughes was a warm and good friend to him. But Dr. King had been warned, and he heeded the warning. He had been warned to be very careful, because Langston Hughes had been hauled by the then unknown Senator Joseph McCarthy, a Republican from Wisconsin. He had been hauled before what is known as the House Un-American Activities Committee, a time of terror. Not the first one in our history, but one of many in a time of terror that particularly sets the playbook for what we are living now. Joe McCarthy rose to fame very quickly when he claimed he had evidence of 200 people in the State Department who were actually spies for Russia. Do I need to tell you whether any evidence was actually produced? I will anyway. It was never produced. Does that matter? Well, it might matter to some of us, but it didn't at the time. And for 4 years or longer, it was actually a true reign of terror in this country. More than 10,000 people detained, at least half of them without any kind of due process at all. Many of those were deported, some of them, like Emma Goldman, deported to Russia. It may feel, my friends, as though we are facing this together for the first time, but we are not. Joe McCarthy eventually did himself in because, like many folks who hold very extreme views, he overreached himself. But as recently as 2020, the Washington Post blared a headline saying, Joe McCarthy was defeated, but McCarthyism has never been defeated. Trumpism will never be defeated. I take issue with that, but we know who now owns the Washington Post, after all. It didn't matter how careful Dr. King was. From the moment he rose to prominence, from the moment he began sharing his message of hope and freedom and equality, he became a target for our government. Remember J. Edgar Hoover? J. Edgar Hoover personally put Dr. King on his list for Hoover's infamous COINTELPRO program. Some of you may remember this. It was a program designed and initiated by Hoover to infiltrate, disrupt, and dismantle, dismember, if you will, any organization he essentially disagreed with, any organization that he could call subversive. The accusation of unpatriotism, the accusation of being a traitor, of being a communist, as was the accusation hurled at all of Joe McCarthy's targets, not only ruined many lives, and I mean many lives. I have relatives who left the country because they could no longer find employment here, for very peripheral associations with the ideals of socialism. And how many times have you and I heard in the last 3, 4, 10, 20, 40 years the accusation of socialist, right? These things don't die. They just, resurface. Like those, what are they, gophers in that game where you pound one and 20 more pop up? I never played that because it freaked me out, but those are my issues. The accusation and the cloud it put over Dr. King hounded him literally to the end of his life. In 1964, the FBI of the United States of America sent him an anonymous letter which Dr. King believed was designed to induce him to commit suicide. He didn't. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, Dr. King turned to his wife, Coretta, and said, that's what's going to happen to me. He knew. He knew almost from the very beginning that the likelihood was that his life would end in assassination. And his faith and his prayers and communion with the God he served held him firm and steadfast in his commitment. I told you earlier this morning that when he was asked to come preach at the National Cathedral, that many folks in that congregation absolutely did not want him to be there. Little did they know that within a week, his body would be back there for its final honors. But nonetheless, the invitation was kept. He came to the National Cathedral and he preached a powerful message, including elements of things that were core, absolutely core, to the vision he had for our country and for the world. My friends, January 20th has been designated for a long time to be a day when we remember Dr. King, when we honor his legacy. But beloveds, I'm asking us this morning to go beyond remembering and honoring, but to actually relearn the lessons that he was seeking to teach us. Because after all, a famous Nobel laureate who dies and becomes a martyr may be very famous, but that person can no longer actively disrupt the things in our society that are designed to oppress. That's our job. That's our job now. So one of the themes that he repeated in that sermon, and in fact was the title of his sermon, was a theme he had shared with our Unitarian Universalist Association, which, as you may know, the time when the two denominations came together was in 1963. And not long after that, Dr. King was invited to deliver what is a very prestigious lecture in our tradition, which is the Ware Lecture. And he told us in that lecture, he said, "Stay awake for the revolution. Stay awake." He said, they always tell me, those who criticize me, they always tell me the time is not right for what you're doing. Just be patient. The time will come. All this racism stuff, all this inequity stuff, it will work itself out. And his response to that, I'll say it again, it is always the right time to do the right thing. It is never the right time to disrupt the systems of power that keep all of us in chains. It is never the right time to disrupt that. Dr. King was arrested 29 times in his short ministry, from 29 when he became truly famous to 39. Sometimes it's hard to remember that when he was killed, he was a very young man. And in one of those arrests, he was in the Birmingham jail, and he received a set of criticism. A group of white religious leaders, including many Christian leaders and Jewish leaders in Birmingham, gave him that same message that I just related to you. We don't like your nonviolent tactics. They are very disruptive. It's too soon. You need to wait, etc., etc. And as he processed those criticisms, he created what many of you perhaps may have read over the years. He created a famous document entitled "The Letter from Birmingham Jail." And in it, he said this, and I want to share his words verbatim. He says, "I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. They constantly say, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action. Paternalistically feeling that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of the time and who constantly advises the black man to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Knowing that at any moment he could die, Dr. King repeated these themes in his final sermon. He repeated the lessons he had wanted us to learn for all the years of his prophetic journey. In this final sermon, among many other things, not only did he say to us, stay awake during the revolution, and I'll come back to that in a moment. We should remain aware, he said. We should not become complacent or, and this is for me the most important part, wait for someone else to do the work. Because waiting for someone else to do the work, frankly, doesn't ever get the work done. That, to me, is what faith means. Not necessarily an unwavering belief in something that may or may not be supernatural. But faith is something that burns brightly in our hearts. It is a vision of the greater good. It is a commitment to that greater good. It is a commitment to put love at the center of our lives, as difficult as it might be. Dr. King said in that final sermon, you need to climb the ladder even though you may not know where the ladder goes. I remember in a congregation I served, I worked a lot with a person in that congregation who wanted desperately to do the work for social justice, but also desperately wanted a complete roadmap. And I said, there is no such thing as a roadmap. We know how to do community organizing. We know how to do the footwork. We know how to call on our faith and our courage and one another to do this work. But there's no magic final destination. And then I said, I quoted Paulo Freire, some of you may know him, the great revolutionary Brazilian educator, whose, in my view, the best book is We Make the Road by Walking. I paraphrased him a little bit. I said, my friend, we're flying the plane while we're building it. This was probably the most terrifying thing I could have said, so I should have retracted it, but I didn't. It's true, right? We are flying the plane. Because if we wait until everything is built and all the seats are stitched and all the bells and whistles are there and the map is completely clear, it'll be too late. It may feel to you in this moment that the revolution is not only impossible but maybe invisible. You may be frightened, anxious, heartbroken at what has been threatened, heartbroken at how many power brokers, Jeff Bezos, did I say a name? Mark Zuckerberg, did I say another name? Have caved and are coming to Washington hats in hand, saying, please don't hurt my multi-gazillion-dollar business. They weren't on our side anyway. So you may be discouraged. God help me, during the first administration of our incoming president, I really struggled. But I'm not going to struggle this time. I'm going to struggle to do what's right, to accompany my beautiful Unitarian Universalist people as we stride forward together to the best of our ability. But I will not let the architects of fear hijack my life. And I urge you to join me. The revolution is strong. You just shared something really important with us. Thank you. In every community in this country, there are environmental activists fighting for the planet you and I live on. In every community, there are feminists of all gender identities fighting to regain the rights of reproductive freedom and reproductive rights. Am I right? In every community, there are people holding out their arms to support and sustain some of the most vulnerable communities right now, communities of immigrants, communities with no access to health care. OBGYNs have left Texas in droves. There are not even a handful left. Hundreds and thousands of people without health care. And in every community, dear ones, the revolution is thriving, including this one. Dr. King knew, as he shared these messages once again, he didn't know that he would be dead 5 days later, but he knew that that death would come sooner or later. And he said to the people who came to hear him a few days later for a speech called a mountaintop speech, he said, "I am not afraid. Like everyone else, I want to live a long life, but I am not afraid because I have seen the mountaintop." When I was in Birmingham last year, I had the opportunity to go through the house where he and Coretta and their children lived, where a bomb threat, well, not a threat, actually, a bomb went off, luckily on their porch, and no one was hurt. And I saw the chair where he sat one night and prayed to the God he served all night long, asking for guidance. And he followed that guidance and was not afraid. When they autopsied his body, the 39-year-old man had the heart of a 60-year-old. And it was said that it was because of all the stresses he had lived under for so many years. At the end of that final sermon, he told us what he wanted us to focus on. And I'd like to share with you those closing words.
Every now and then I get all about that day when we will be victimized with what is life's final common denominator. That's something we call death. We all think about it, and every now and then I think about my own death, and I think about my own funeral, and I don't think of it in a morbid sense. Every now and then I ask myself, what is it that I would want to say? I leave the word to you this morning. If any of you around, when I have to meet my day, I don't want a long funeral. And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell them not to talk too loud. Every now and then I wonder what I want them to say. Tell them not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize. That isn't important. Tell them not to mention that I have 300 or 400 other awards. That's not important. Tell them not to mention where I went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that day that I tried to be right on the walkway. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try to feed the hungry. I want you to be able to say that day that I did try in my life to want to say, if I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word of song, if I can show somebody he's traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian, or if I can bring salvation to a world once wrought, if I can spread the message as the Master taught, then my living will not be in vain. Yes, Jesus, I want to be on your right or your left side, not for any selfish reason. I want to be on your right or your left side, not in terms of some political kingdom or ambition, but I just want to be there in love and in justice and in truth and in commitment to others so that we can make of this old world a new world.
I invite you to take a moment and let those words sink in. Perhaps repeat to yourself, if I can help somebody, my life will not be in vain. If we, as a community of faith and courage and commitment, can help somebody, our time together will not be in vain. Those were his last words from a pulpit. And 5 days later, he was shot in the head and left us. Ashe, beloveds. Amen. And blessed be.